For those of you that don't know me, I'm Aaron Harris with Direct Action Texas. We focus on local government, local being your city council, your ISDs, your county. We're going to be doing something with some water board maybe in May. It's going to be a lot of fun. And so we look at local because we believe that, I think Wayne was saying earlier, all government starts local, right? We have a guy sitting in the White House who started as a community organizer. And so we have a person running for governor right now who started off at our city council. We have a Democrat representing House District 12 who calls herself a Republican, who started off as a city council member and worked her way up. So we need to stop some of these people in their track here at the local level, and we have a much greater ability to do so if we can tackle them locally, right? It's much harder to influence a presidential race. It costs a lot more money than it does, say, a city council race. So that's my passion, is to get involved at the local level. And I also believe, how many of you here, let me see how many people agree with me. How many of you would agree that there's a lot of corruption in our local government? All right, so I'm gonna sympathetic crowd here. You know, one of the things I found out as I started looking around is a lot of things, as I started asking questions, a lot of things that I think are corruption. You know what I find out that they really are? They're just simply inept. So that's one thing you always got to keep in mind. A lot of times I've gone looking for information and different things, only to find out that the government doesn't actually track things that you and I would track if we were running it as a business. I'm a real estate investor, and did you know that the Tarrant County has no ability to tell you how many properties the governments of Tarrant County own? Did you know if you don't pay your property taxes, they will take that house and evict you and foreclose on you and eventually evict you, and they will now own it. And the primary entities that do this are your school districts. That's your number one property tax, right? And then your cities. And your cities will do it if you don't mow your yard. They'll come mow it for you, and they'll eventually foreclose on you for that. As a real estate investor, I've seen them call them weedlings. You'll see these properties get foreclosed on for weedlings, different things. We have no way as a county of actually tracking and getting a reporting of how many properties our ISDs, cities, county, etc. own. And at first I'm like, man, it's a big cover-up. I got real up in arms. And I started talking to different people and talked to the county commissioner and our tax assessor and our county clerk, and come to find out they just really don't have any way of doing it. They've never thought about keeping track of that. And so, you know, you just kind of shake your head and you figure out another way to fight it. So when we look at these government agencies, and a lot of times we get riled up, and the question I was asking, so what do you do about it, right? What do you do about your local government agency that you believe is corrupt or whatever? The first thing I want to say, it should be obvious, but it's not, and that is really do your homework and inform yourself about that government agency, okay? Let's take a city council, for example. Go read their city charter. You'd be amazed at how much you can learn. I live in North Richland Hills. Our city charter's, if I recall correctly, about 20 or 30 pages long. It's not very long. Okay, so it's not like Obamacare. Go read that, and you'll find that you'll learn quite a bit. You know, one of the things you'll learn, probably the most enlightening thing that I learned when I read these government agencies, bylaws, or charters, or whatever they might have, is that the majority of what they're doing is not in there. Yeah. So that's the first thing you need to do, is educate yourself and inform yourself about that. You know, something else we're going to be doing a lot more of in the future, and talking about is, first off, how many people have ever read your city charter? Yeah, Nicole, of course. Okay. One of the things you're going to find is that
the city of Boston doesn't count.
No. So Nicole knows what I'm about to talk about. But one of the things that's very interesting, did you know that you can do a petition drive in your city to change the city charter? Okay. This is something on the state level. We don't have a lot of states. Like we always see California has different propositions on their statewide ballots. Texas doesn't have a statewide charter or constitutional change, so as citizens we can't, from the grassroots up, evoke a change on a state level. But on your city level you can. We'll do Q&A again. Okay? So that's something a lot of people want to change. But on a city level you can. So let's take most city charters in the Metroplex, not all, but most of them have a clause that essentially says if you get 5% of the voter turnout from your last general election, which for most of these suburbs is not that many people, you can force a special election. So basically you take the petition, and let's say you have a petition, I don't know, to ban red light cameras. And you get 5% of the voters from the last election. You can then submit those to the City Council of Arlington, and they then have 30 days to voluntarily adopt that city charter amendment. And if they don't adopt it in that 30 days, they then have to have a special election 30 days later. So you have a 60-day window where you can affect real change to your city. You know who doesn't have any kind of provision like this is your school district. Those guys you really have no way of really affecting. They don't have a charter. But anyhow, so if you read your city charter, you'll learn things like that. So first off, if you're interested about a local government, just really inform yourself about who they are, what they do, where their authority comes from. I spoke about this last time. So let's say you have an issue with your city. Where does the authority of the city come from? It comes from the charter and from the people. If you have an issue with your county judge, let's say the county commissioner's court, who oversees the county commissioners? I mentioned them last time. It's the state legislature. So the state of Texas creates our counties and establishes that every county will have 4 commissioners and a judge, and that's 5. So it doesn't matter the size of the county in Texas, they all have 5, because their authority, they are created by the state legislature. So let's say that we have a problem with our county commissioners. Who can we appeal to? We can appeal to Craig and his buddies. But if I have a problem with my city council, who do I appeal to? The voters, because that's who creates the city. So inform yourself about the entity. The reason you want to inform yourself is because of the next thing. The next thing you want to do is ask questions. I think this is probably the thing that as grassroots we overlook the most. And there's a couple reasons you want to ask questions. One is the obvious, is you really want to find out and learn and educate yourself on why they're doing what they're doing. The other is, the more you let these people talk, the more incredible stuff they will say, okay? And I say that very sarcastically. I have an audio out there right now floating around from a certain superintendent called Randy Reed of Keller ISD, in which he says, I'll give you all the transparency you want, just not on the ballot. Woo. Now the next thing I'm going to tell you is he figured out when I released that audio, always record your interactions with elected officials. Okay? So Texas is a one-party state, which means that as long as one of you know you're recording, you can record. Okay? I record all my interactions with every elected official, because when you ask them questions, they will, it's not if, it's when. They will say something stupid. They will say something brilliant. They will say something outside of the realm of what they should. Always record it, okay? Record everything you say. So ask questions. Ask obvious questions. A lot of times you ask really obvious questions, and they give you the best responses, and your jaw will drop. But then you have the audio of that, okay? So ask a lot of questions. I have found, a lot of times I'll ask questions in a genuine manner just to find out, like, hey Wayne, why are you guys doing this? And then the answer he comes back with just blows my mind. I wasn't expecting it, okay? But sometimes you're so caught up in the, holy cow, I can't believe you just said that. That's why you got to have that recorder. You need to go back and listen to it later. And then one of the things I like to do is ask questions about their core mission. Okay? Let's take, for example, well, you can do your city, you can do the Tarrant Regional Water District. Last month we were at the meeting where the TRWD, for those of you that don't know it, most of you in this room are very well informed. So, you know, the TRWD has the TRV, Trinity River Vision, their economic development situation there. So they were appointing some board members, and Ross Kessig and I were there, and we just started asking them questions. So let me back up and say this. The TRWD was created in, I believe, 1936 or 38. In 2005, this real strong conservative here in Fort Worth called Charlie Guerin created the TRV through local consent. That was a joke. Anyhow, so Charlie invented the TRWD in the local consent agenda down in Austin. And what that did was it gave the TRWD the authority to have an economic development arm. So we sat there and just asked the president of the board, his name is Vic Henderson, and just asked him about that. Why'd y'all do that? What's your authority to do so? Why did y'all need it? Because he was telling us that TRWD had the authority for economic development. Okay, then why'd you create the TRV if you already had that authority? And you just let these guys talk, okay? So two things will happen there. Like I said, first you'll learn a lot. You'll learn to their psyche, what they're thinking, what they're doing. They'll also give you ammunition that you can use to campaign, hopefully, against them, or whatever it might be. Hold them accountable for what they're saying, okay? So ask questions. Then also ask about, familiarize yourself with their budget, okay? So let's take, I'm going to pick on them because they're my favorite target. If y'all can't figure out what I'm going to be doing next May. Anyhow, so the TRWD gets revenue from 3 sources, okay? Oil and gas, they own a lot of real estate, a lot of land. They have unbelievable oil and gas revenues. Don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere around $50 million a year. Secondly, TRWD is a water wholesaler. They sell water to Fort Worth and Arlington, who processes it and sells it to everybody else. Like me, I live in North Richland Hills, we buy it from Fort Worth. And then the third is they collect the property tax. Right here, we're setting you pay a 0.02% or cent property tax to TRWD. Now, if you look at, that's their income side. You look at their expense side, they provide water and control flooding. That's what their charter tells them to do. Then they give all this money to this thing called the TRV. And if you do the math on it, they can actually cover the cost of providing water and controlling flooding strictly from the oil and gas revenues that they have and a portion of the revenue they have in the revenue fund from selling water to Fort Worth and Arlington. Meaning, the other portion of the revenue fund is excess. They could reduce the rates instead of increasing them the way they have been, and they can eliminate their property tax to zero. Which, by the way, it was zero for 10 years from 85 to 95. So yeah, so that's a liberty issue. Everybody ever believe in liberty? Okay. So eliminate or reduce your property rent to zero from the TRWD, reduce your rates, and get you back to providing water and controlling flooding. However, if you look at the time frame, when they started getting oil and gas revenues, they happened to create this thing called TRV. This year, they're actually going to put more money in the TRV than they are going to spend providing water. Okay? So these are the types of questions you need to ask. What's your core mission? Why are you doing the TRV? Let these guys talk. Get them on record. Figure it out, because at some point you can go to the taxpayers and say, hey guys, you have a decision to make here. Should we be sticking to our core mission of providing water and controlling flooding? If so, okay, taxpayers can get a tax relief and a reduction in our rate. Our rates have been going up instead of going down, and they should be able to at least stay flat. But back to Greg, the point Greg was making earlier, if we have a surplus, we should be giving the money back, not coming up with projects to throw the money in. Okay, and we asked them specifically about that. It was a great conversation. It was a lot of fun. But those types of conversations, I think we don't do enough of that sometimes. We're quick to go up to our elected officials and say, I don't like this, I don't like that, right? How often do you go out in public and get hounded with all the things we don't like? But what we need to do a lot of times is ask questions, because in those questions we're going to learn a lot. The other reason you want to ask questions is because you want to build leverage. And I think this is probably the thing that we as grassroots do the least, and that's build leverage. What do I mean by that? I'll give you a classic example. I was speaking to a president of a club recently, and that club had decided to send their elected officials, the state house members in Tarrant County, a letter telling them where their club stood on a specific issue, Speaker of the House, and saying, please, pretty please, would you maybe vote for the guy we like? And that was how they left it. And I said, now, that's great, but what's going to keep, why wouldn't the state rep just throw that in the trash? What gives that letter? Right? So I said, now, what about if you sent that letter and you said, we support Scott Turner, our membership supports Scott Turner, we want to know where you stand by our next meeting, and if you don't respond, we're going to presume you're against it. Okay? Now all of a sudden, what do you think the odds are they're going to ignore your letter? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. It just depends on how much your club membership has, and if they do, then you have a decision on what to do about that, right? And create that leverage, but you need to get them on record on things. And so a lot of times we just ask them, will you vote for this, right? Frank might come up and say, there's this constitutional issue, I want you to support this. That's great, but get them on record on where they're at and use that ultimately to leverage them on what you're doing. So like one of the things we did, so after you ask these questions, let me back up, sorry. So after you ask these questions, one of the other things we have to do is come up with solutions, right? So going back to Craig, how often do people actually come to you with solutions versus just complaining about a problem? Probably the ratio is probably 21. So a lot of times I'll hear people say, even elected officials, we'll get people elected into office, and I'm not going to name any names on this one, I'll be nice, but especially at the lower level, I'll throw my best friend. My best friend's Mayor Pro Tem down in Kerrville, Texas, in the Hill Country, and we were sharing a heart-to-heart over the summer. He said, I'm a conservative, but once I got into office, I found it really hard a lot of times to put some of these things into practice, right? And so I think that we as grassroots, we as activists, need to come alongside the good ones, the guys that we actually have in office, guys and gals we have in office, and actually bring solutions and actually bring ideas that they can implement. Okay? It's easy to sit around and say, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, but how do we do that? And one of the things that I always suggest to people is, I don't have the solutions to everything. Direct Action Texas, we don't come up with policy. Okay? We don't. We're an execution group. We go out and do action. Other groups, though, come up with great policy. Texas Public Policy Foundation, they're excellent. Empower Texans is excellent. Other groups out there, or even some of our elected officials. Susan Combs has some excellent stuff on transparency on her website, texastransparency.org or tellthetruth.org. You can go on there and find some great advocacy on some stuff we should change. We had a House Bill 14 last year that we tried to do. And so then take those to your elected officials. So what we did, we went and met with Birdville, and we said, we'd like to see these reforms. Now, when you do so, let me recommend you find things that are a broad scope of appeal. So what we went and did, instead of saying, hey Birdville, we don't like your bond because you're spending too much money over here or over there, we didn't address the specifics of the bonds. We said, let's talk about the process, right? So we said, let's make it transparent. Let's put the ballot transparency, that's a fancy word for tell the voters how much the debt is, the interest, current, proposed, tax rate, put it on the ballot. Let's have the voters look at it. You know, that's something that both Democrats and Republicans can appreciate. Okay? And so go in with solutions. A lot of times, like, take a step back, and if you're mad about, you know, the park they're putting in next to your house, well, go back and take a step back and go back to the scope of authority of the government. Do they have the authority to do that in the first place? And address some of these things from a more broad perspective and principles. And what you'll find is, a lot of times, you take their argument away. So when we went to Birdville and we said, hey, we're going to oppose your bond, they came and said, oh, you're going to oppose our bond no matter what we do, blah, blah, blah. You guys just don't like spending, blah, blah, blah. We said, well, actually, if you do these reforms, we'll support it. And it completely threw them off their game. They wanted to talk about, you know, well, how would you fund it? How would you do this? We said, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about these reform principles. Okay? And what we found was, as soon as we did that, the principles were so broad in the sense of support, like nobody could say no to those things, that it completely took their argument away, and it was great. And so then you get them on record, and you can use those things to build consensus with the community around those things. Bring solutions. And then the next thing, of course, is hold them accountable, right? So the whole reason you want to get your local government on the record is so that you can hold them accountable. At the end of the day, you know, Craig's going to go down to Austin. Craig's always here, so I get to pick on him. But he's going to go down to Austin. You know what's going to happen? At the end of the session, he's going to have 20 different scorecards that we're going to presume to tell us how he did. We're going to have different ways to be able to measure how Goldman did during the session, or Giovanni, or Stephanie Click, or the new one, Connie Burton. Woo! Okay, so we're going to be able to go back and measure it. But let me ask you, what's City Council doing? How are you going to measure that? Right? So that's where we have to come in, get these guys on record, and then be able to hold them accountable. The nice thing about a City Council race is there's a lot less people to inform about what they did in order to win. Right? Last year we fought the Birdville bond. There was only 7,600 people in that whole election. So we targeted 750 people, 10%, and we won. So hold your people hold your elected officials accountable, but you can only do that if you ask them questions and get them on the record. And that is where, going back to TRWD and other organizations, there are organizations out there who are doing some things that are very questionable at best. Okay, when I raised my hand, everybody, pretty much the whole room said they believe there's corruption at the local level. I believe there's corruption at the local level. That's why I'm in this game, right? I believe there's a lot of cronyism at the local level. All right, and so if you believe there's cronyism in your local government, your school board, whatever it might be, start asking those questions. The uncomfortable questions are what'll get you to the bottom of it, and at some point they're going to say something, and you're going to have them. And that's where you have to keep digging. Keep digging. Don't presume. How can I say this? Okay, I'm just going to say it. The problem is you go meet these guys, and they're really nice guys, right? I tell people all the time, I bet Barack Obama was a lot of fun to have basketball with, or play basketball with, but I don't want to have anything to do with his politics, right? He's not a good guy. He's trying to take my money out of my pocket and put it in other people's pockets. Anybody that tries to do that to me is bad. Your local school board is taking money out of your pocket to put in other people's pockets. And here's where you cross the line with me, is when you're lying about it. The extent that some of these people will go to cover up what they're doing, that's where you really cross the line from just being a nice guy who got elected to the school board to somebody who crossed over to the other side. And that's where you have to always keep in mind. So what happens a lot of times, we meet these guys and go, Wayne's on my school board, he's a nice guy, our kids play together. And he might be. Don't confuse a nice guy, though, with bad policies. A lot of these policies, I'll say it, they're evil. Okay? They're evil. They're doing bad things. They're taking money out of my pocket to do that which they shouldn't. I think it was Thomas Jefferson, I can't remember his exact quote, it was something like, if you're taking money away from me to pay for things that I have a moral problem with, that's evil. And you might remember the quote I'm talking about. But anyhow, so that's what I want to talk about tonight, is political leverage. Just get these guys on record. The tape recorder is your best friend. I think the biggest mistake we make is just not being able to prove what these guys said. Because they so often just double speak, right? They'll tell everybody what they want. And we have to start getting them on record, then hold them accountable for that which they said. We've been doing that for a little short period, and it's already been a lot of fun. And they just really don't know how to respond when you do that. So that's my challenge to you, is educate yourself in your local government. Ask a lot of questions. Ask questions that might make them uncomfortable. That's okay. You're not there to be their friend. You're there to hold them accountable and find out what's really going on. Ask questions about why they're doing things that aren't part of the core mission of that government agency. Speaking of core mission, did you know that Texas Association of School Boards has taught your school districts that their mission is not just to educate your children? The mission of the public schools is to make the world a better place. So, you look at the budget, and you go, here's the portion that's going to teach my kid how to read, write, and add. Here's the portion that's going to a bunch of other stuff. He said, we can cut that out. And I had a really interesting conversation with Dr. Reed about that. He said, no, we can't, because our mission is to make the world a better place. Okay? But they're taught this by Texas Association of School Boards. So what happens if Frank over here decides to run for school board, and he wins on the May ballot? Guess what the first place he goes? He goes to TASB to get trained on how to be a school board member. And TASB's going to teach them that their job is to make the world a better place. It's not just to educate kids.
I'm going to tell them to stick it.
Well, there you go. That's why we didn't like Frank. But my point being, you get into that core mission issue, right? You get into the core mission of what is the ISD's core mission. They'll sit there and tell you they don't have enough money. And I said, you're insane if you're going to tell me that $330 million a year is not enough money to teach some kids how to read and write. And it is to teach them how to read and write. It's not enough money to make the world a better place. And so that's where those questions come in. I didn't find out that TASB, I've since gone and looked it up, I didn't find out that TASB has in their training and their mission statement that is to make the world a better place until I was sitting there asking him questions about the budget. Had nothing to do with it. And then we had a philosophical disagreement on whether or not they had enough money, and then he brought up the fact that they don't have enough money to make the world a better place. Evidently breeding unicorns and making rainbows is expensive. And so, but it was through asking those questions that came up. Okay, you see how the questions are what will always lead you down. And I've just found in my short experience that that's been a real eye-opener for me, because I was kind of like probably the rest of you. I came into politics because I was mad, right? Most of us do that. We go home, we turn on TV, and you pick your poison, whatever it might be, Fox, or I'm going to guess there's no MSNBC or CNN people in there. Drudge Report, whatever it might be, right? And you get mad. But you know what? Anger's a good motivator, but anger's not going to solve the problem. Anger's not going to get us better government. And so what we need is better government. We need more transparent government, and we need less government. Okay? And in order for us to get there, we have to ask the questions. Thanks. In order for us to get there, we have to ask those questions about core government so that we can cut it. When we proposed the TRWD through a series of questions of, hey, why didn't you just give the taxpayers their money back? It was like, we never thought of that. We were aliens. It was, why the heck did we do that? Well, you used to have a tax rate of 0. Why don't you go back to a tax rate of 0? If you stuck to your core mission, you could cut your rates and give everybody their tax money back. And they looked at us like, you people are weird. Okay? But listen, this is going on at your city council. This is going on at your school boards. This is going on at your dog catcher. This is going on at your state rep. This is going on everywhere. Okay? COGS. So that's my challenge to you tonight. Learn, get comfortable with asking questions. Every time you go to a city council meeting or school board, beforehand, think about questions. Why are we doing X, Y, Z? And then just pursue those questions with the board members after the meeting. You'll be surprised what you'll learn. You'll be surprised what they say. Get it on record. All right, that's it. Thanks.